right. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me now so that we can hear my voice? All right. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about pots and images on pots. And I'm going to talk about the region called the Mogollon region. This sort of strange looking word, Mogollon. It's pronounced Mogollon. And it is kind of one of the big cultural areas of North America. And you have essentially the old Anasazi or ancestral Pueblo to the north, and you have the Hohokam to the west. And I'm going to talk about this region down here, the Mogollon region, and kind of more specifically, the Jornada Mogollon. I'm also going to cheat a little and talk about some sites up in here. So I'm going to be speaking about sites in this general region down here. And I will say that over the last, here's another example. I kind of drew it on a map for you. And so we have the Jornada or desert Mogollon area and the Mimbres or mountain Mogollon area. Mimbres is probably a lot more common word to you because of their famous pottery that they have. But you can see in this Jornada Mogollon area down here where I'm going to talk, and I'm going to talk some about some sites up in this area up here. And I will say that over the past 8 or 10 years, I've been working on Fort Bliss, which is out of El Paso, Texas. And I've been working on White Sands Missile Range, which takes a big, huge area up across here like this. And then I've also been working on Carlsbad, in and around Carlsbad National Park, which is over here, essentially slightly outside the area. And I've recorded about 60 different rock art sites, but there are actually 3 really important sites in this area. One's called the Three Rivers site, and it's been recorded fairly intensively, and it has over 21,000 elements at it. So that gives you some idea of the size of the site. It's a massive rock art site. And Alamo Mountain, which is less well known, is actually said to be larger. It's never been recorded, but it has more than 25,000 elements at it. A major, major site. And Waco Tanks, which probably some of you may have heard of, has a lot of painted images, and it's also not quite as large in terms of numbers, but in terms of the sorts of things that are there, it's a pretty important site. And in any case, I've been working in and around this area at other sites, all of these other 80, 90 sites, while you have these big major sites that you have. So we're going to compare pots to rock art. So here's an example. This is a Mimbres bowl. And if you don't know the Mimbres painted stuff, they have all these different images inside bowls. And so you see a fish petroglyph here, and you can see that it's quite a lot like the fish inside the bowl. So, I mean, and here's a good article on this if you're interested in taking it a little bit further. But from a perspective of relative dating, you could look at this fish on the rock and you could suggest that it's going to be the same age as this fish in this bowl here. And so in that way, it's instructive, but I'm going to show you in a few minutes that it doesn't work all that well as we might like to think it would. But this is one example of comparing pottery to rock art, and especially where you have figurative images on pottery, but it isn't always that. Here, for example, is a pot, Chupadero black on white pottery, and it's a different pottery in the Jornada Mogollon region. And you can see that there have been an article written on comparing the rock art. Again, this is that Three Rivers site where you have these concentric circles, and you have dots and concentric circles on this particular figure. So you have a series of dots and concentric circle designs so that it isn't always figurative. You can get classic designs that will also work. Now I'm going to move you to a site called the Painted Walls site. And so if you look at this site right here, it's one that we recorded on White Sands Missile Range. And here it is. It doesn't look like much when you're looking at it from the side, a rock shelter that's sloping up across in this direction. If we look down into it, you can see that it's got some overhang, but it certainly looks like kind of crude, sort of rough place to sort of hang out. But what you discover is that the entire back wall of this rock shelter is painted with images, and a lot of them are these faces or masks. Sometimes they're called Katsina faces, but as you'll learn from me tonight, I wouldn't trust that all the time. The Pueblo peoples do not like the term mask because they feel that when one of those masks is on one of the participants in these things, that they become part of the individual, so they become faces to them rather than masks. But you can see from some of David Kaiser's drawings here that he was at this site and worked with us. You can see that these are elaborate sorts of things that where you have these masks that look very much like faces. Here's one that's got a large nose. You can actually link some of these to Katsina individuals, but it's harder than you might think it would be. I mean, the Katsinas have changed through the years, and so it's difficult to really link them to actual Katsinas. That's one place that Native Americans become useful. And on our projects, we've had Native Americans working on every project we've had in this area with us during the recording process. And here is this one here. We radiocarbon dated this one. And I'll say a little more about radiocarbon dating, but if you don't know, we can radiocarbon date paintings now. And it's a tried and tested technique to where it's really quite accepted that we get good results with a plasma oxidation process that was developed by Marvin Rowe and is used by Karen Steelman. And you can see that this one is AD 600 to 980, this particular figure on the side we dated. So here, here's another example of a membrane bowl and a fish that's done in D-stretch, so that you've got this fish in multiple colors here on the rock. And you can see that it's a comparable image. And if we were to use this date for this membrane bowl is AD 1000 to AD 1140. When we radiocarbon dated this fish right here, we got a date of AD 430 to 780. So in other words, several hundred, almost 500 years younger than or more than the date for this fish in this bowl. So as I said a few minutes ago, it's not always wise to you make some comparison for a relative date, but maybe that date isn't going to be accurate when you're done and we also are not absolutely certain that this date is accurate. We actually are going back and we're going to resample this and take a second date to see what comes out, to see if we get a comparable date with that. And or it seems possible that we might have something like with fish petroglyphs here or fish paintings. We might have that fish, that these things are in fact, older in the Jornada Mogollon region than they are in the Mimbres region. And it could be that this image has an evolution from the Jornada over to the Mimbres area. That makes some sense to us in other ways. And by the way, it's not uncommon to find fish on the rocks. That Three Rivers site that I showed you a few minutes ago, they had 75 images of fish on the rocks. And you wonder why? Why are there fish on the rocks? And the answer is probably water. It's water related because much of this rock art is related to making rain for corn crops, and fish are water living animals. And so you get the idea that they have to do with fish. So here we are back in our painted walls rock shelter, and you can see that the surface has house remains on the surface. There probably were just laid up rocks that had a superstructure made out of wood that sort of leaned into the back wall of the rock shelter. But what's curious is I think there were 9 of these room blocks or these rooms inside this rock shelter. And what's curious is that the back walls of these were painted red and had designs painted into them. So, I mean, here you are with this kind of crude looking houses but yet this rather elaborate preparation of the back walls of each of the houses. And what's interesting is that one of these, you can see this one here is a painted wall on the outside. And when we were recording the site, this is Amanda Castaneda, she crawled underneath that to look down, and she discovered that there was a lower chamber down below the surface. Now remember, this surface had those house-like things on it. She looks into this lower chamber and she finds this completely painted wall down here. The whole back wall is painted down below. Here's Dave Kaiser's drawing of it. You can see it's extremely elaborate and extremely well executed design. And so that what you learn is that when you compare that to Chupadero black on white designs, you get these linked together spiral type designs. You get these opposing step fret type designs on it, so that you've got this pretty good comparison. And now we're hoping that we have this somewhere between these two types of pottery right here, that we're going to end up being able to get to estimate the age. We're hoping when we go back to this site and collect samples, that's in about 10 days, we're going to go back. We're hoping that we're going to be able to get a sample from this panel. It's going to be a little hard for our dating analyst, Karen Steelman, to crawl under there, because you can't get your whole body under there. She'll have to just get her arms down inside there and try to work with scraping off a tiny amount of paint. But hopefully she thinks she might be able to do it. So we'll have some notion about it, whether or not it happens, whether or not she's going to be able to get a sample in about 10 days. So that should be fun. Here's another example of where we have El Paso polychrome pots. These are slightly more recent than the other pots, but you can see that you got a diamond shaped design, and you got a sort of a scroll type design, sort of a squared out scroll type design. So that's the whole idea of this comparison of pottery designs to rock art. And I think we're going to try, these designs mean something. They have some ancient history in Mexico. And you end up with some of the, like, for example, some of them mean mountains, like triangles mean mountains, and cloud terraces, like a series of clouds, like some squared off designs mean cloud terraces and other sorts of things. So it is an interesting way to look at symbolism. I'd like to jump now to Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument. And this is 3 sites, Cuare, Abo, and Guancravera. And they're located here in New Mexico. I said north. I was going to talk some about these sites to the north. And I'm going to hear our examples of these. This is a national park, unit of the National Park Service. And you can see, just looking at one of these churches here, these churches were built between 1622 and 1635. So you can imagine the amount of Indian labor that went into building these churches for the Franciscan missioners. And so massive, big, huge church facilities that you see. And then they were abandoned in the 1670s. And they were abandoned in part because of dryness, and they couldn't grow the corn, especially the amount that the priests were demanding of them from these various Pueblo sites that got turned into these mission sites, but also because the Apache were raiding and attacking this area. And so between those two things, they abandoned this area, and these people who were in this area back on this side of the mountain range right here moved over to the other side of the mountains and rejoined tribes like Isleta Pueblo and other Pueblo groups, and some went south to Pueblo del Sur down near El Paso. So, but of considerable interest is the fact that at Gran Cavera, one of these sites, Mound 7, was excavated. And in the process of excavating that site, they found this Tabirware black on white pottery, which dates between 1550 and 1672. And you can see that the designs on these are warriors, and like shield-bearing warriors. And if we look at the distribution of shield-bearing warriors in the region, you'll see that the area north up here in Albuquerque and north up to Santa Fe, up across to Santa Fe, you see these kind of shield figures, which have designs and large shields surrounding their bodies and so on. But in the south, down in the Jornada region, you only find these Apache type shield figures, which have less design, kind of open bodies, more simply made kinds of figures. And like for Three Rivers, for example, that massive site I told you about with the thousands of elements of rock art, they have no shield-bearing warriors there at all. So this Jornada region down here has only these Apache ones, which are more recent in time. So with that filled in information, let's move to a site in East Manzano. Here it's a site on the east side of the Manzano Mountains right here in this little rock shelter-like thing. And you can see the painted figures in the site. One here, for example, here's a guy holding a shield in his hand. And this is a series of little tiny shield-bearing warriors. Some of them have legs and some of them lack legs. And you can see that there's a row of them across here. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them here, but they go around this bend this way and they go around this bend this way. They're in very poor condition, but there are probably about 20 to 25 of them kind of in a row across here. And this site so desperately needs to be recorded. All we've done at it is take some photographs. Here is an example of D-stretch with this one, and you see his body a little better, and you see his shield. I think it's a shield that he's holding in his hand. Well, what's of more interest is you see the leg of another guy behind him here that we need to get out there and record. We need to do something to get this stuff recorded. We've only been to the site one time, and there's so much to do, but we're losing this stuff. You can see it's falling off the wall here. Here's D-stretch of this one. It doesn't do a whole lot better, but you can see those shield figures, the little bitty shield guys that go across there. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating stuff that you find at these sites. And I can well imagine what we find if we did a systematic recording of the entire site. But what's of interest is that at this site, there's this one guy that's a shield-bearing warrior. You can see his shield. Here's Dave Kaiser's drawing of it. This one's in better shape than the guy next to him here, but you can see he's got a circular shield. He's got a bow coming out the side. He's got some feathers or something on the top of his head, and he's wearing this black mask. And if we look at our buddy down here that I showed you on that pot, you can see directly that he's the same thing. Here he is. You can see he's got the same kind of mask across his eyes. He's got the same kind of feathers over the top of his head, and very much a very similar kind of figure. Notice the feathers. I'll show them to you again in a few seconds. Notice on this one that you got these projectile points on his shield, and it looks like he's got a projectile point earring up here on the side of his head. This guy doesn't have that, but from my perspective, these are so similar that almost certainly we're looking at the same kind of people. These are people who made the pots at Gran Covera. So they are Gran Coverans, if we want to call them that, the people that did this. So here's a warrior, for example. So Gran Covera people were called Tompiros, or some people call them the Humanos or Rayados. The Spanish called them the Rayados because they had painted or tattooed faces. And so those dark things across their eyes and their faces are tattooed. Here you can see this warrior, and you can see him here in D-stretch, so he shows up better. And you can see he's got a bow, and he's got a hat on top of his head. He's got a shield across his body, shooting with his arrow, shooting out. And I'll show you who he's shooting at in a minute. But before I do that, here's a pottery sherd from Gran Covera. And you can see we got the same guy. I mean, he's got the same face, the same eye, the same headdress, feathered stuff on top of his head. So we got this very close comparison between this, telling us that this is a guy from Gran Covera, the people who made the pottery, with this pot right here. Here, for example, now is who he's shooting at. Here he is over here. Here he is in D stretch, and he's shooting across at this guy over here. This guy over here is got a shield that's an open shield, like our Apache shields. So there's good reason to believe that this is an Apache guy who's fighting with a Grand Coveran. The two of them are fighting back and forth. What's most interesting is that the Apache guy has a woman who he's captured. A captured woman, you can tell from her hair bobs that she represents the Pueblo people, and she's being taken away by the Apache guy who has a horse over the top of him in a rather odd position, but still this horse up above him. And you got this guy fighting who's also got a horse above him. We don't know quite what the position of these horses is, whether or not they're suggested to be laying down and fighting defensively from behind. But here's the captured woman. And you can see that over time, other individuals have gone there and scratched over this captured woman that you have here. And so you have this whole little scene fighting back and forth with the Grand Coveran trying to save a captured woman from being taken by an Apache that you see here. Look at these feathers out here. Remember the feathers I showed you? Here are these feathers floating in the scene out here. I have no idea what that means, but these feathers are flying around in these war scenes. With some reason that's of importance. It certainly, again, though, is a second tie to the fact that this pottery, Tabiroware pottery, is the same as the age on this painting that we have on the wall. I think that's pretty interesting stuff. I mean, that's pretty comparable, pretty interesting stuff. Now let's look at a site called Abo West. It's on the other side of the Manzano Mountains. So we're south of Albuquerque. This is the Manzano Mountains coming down here. The Sandias up here coming down to this area. And on this side of the mountains, there's a site. I've not been there. It's in an area called Terra Grande. That's one of those developments where they sold 20-acre plots to people with big photographs and pictures of lakes and people water skiing on them. And it's just a bunch of desert. And this site is difficult to get to because you have to go through a whole bunch of those 20-acre plot-like areas to get back to the wall to where it is on it's actually on railroad land. But in fact, it's kind of tough to head through there because half of the houses have pit bulls chained up on front of them, and it's kind of rough to orient your way through thinking you're going to get bit up by a dog somewhere. But here's the picture at that side. We only have a couple of photographs, and we have been able to de-stretch them so that we can see a little bit about what's going on in them. But this one, obviously, we got a fight scene going on. We got a guy here who's in a bow and arrow down at the bottom with a bow or a spear. And he's fighting with this guy over here. What's of interest is there's a captured woman here behind him. So if you look up, here's this guy with this cub down here. And if you look up, you see this. I only got this photograph. I haven't been there to photograph it, as I said, but here's the drawing that they did of it. And it's missing quite a bit in the drawing, and we're obviously going to get a lot more out of it when we go to the site. But the important point is we've got essentially that same scene where we've got a captured woman in that same position with her legs spread and being hauled away or taken captive by, in this case, we don't know who the individual is, whether it's Apache or somebody else, with what's happening, or if she's being defended, or what's happening in the whole scene. But that's another captured woman. Okay, let's move to the site called Two Little Guys and the Black Mass site. These are two sites, and they're actually on White Sands Missile Range, which starts down here and goes all the way up to here in New Mexico. It's a big, huge missile range where, you know, they were shooting and using training for learning how they could shoot long range missiles and stuff. So it's a big, extremely long area. And so you'll see the Two Little Guys site and the Black Mass site are across from each other. And here's the Two Little Guys site. And you can see it's kind of up. This is got a nice rock shelter floor. These are really quite nice living facilities. One like this one, I mean, they're protected well from the rain. You've got pretty good protection. The back wall of this one has paintings all the way along the back wall. So here's a view out from the Two Little Guys site, and you can see across the Black Mass sites on the other side. So now, if you're offended by sexual scenes, you should look away. Now that I've got all of your attention, I'll show you the sexual scene. You'll see that you've got an abstract figure, and you've got two figures, obviously in sort of a 69 position up here. And we've got a tadpole. I showed this down here. We got a tadpole because that's quite common in Jornada Mogollon rock art. And so it means that this thing, your first inclination would be that it's fake, that someone faked it or did something. But in fact, because of this tadpole down here, which no one would fake, they wouldn't know to fake it and even put it in the same kind of paint, the same whatever. Here's a closer up photograph of it. And you can see this is where the name Two Little Guys comes from, suggesting that it's two men. But most of us think that because it's got rounded buttocks, that it's a woman on the bottom and a male on the top in this position. I will say that there are sexual scenes in rock art, but this one is quite unusual. You do not find a scene like this in rock art very often. I will say also that not too far from this site, there is another. This is a site I've not been to, and this is taken out of a book, but you can see it's the same idea where you've got intercourse going with a male back to female. And you got figures that are made in much the same way, sort of simply, with sort of straight arms and rounded body kind of feature to create it. So probably more of the same thing in the area. But what's of interest to us is this big long panel that you have on the wall here, and it goes all the way from over here. You got little things down here, and this is the stuff of most interest to us over on this side over here. So for example, here's a drawing of it, I think by Dave Kaiser. And you can see that there are bugs and things down here which are of some interest, but we don't look like centipedes or something, but we don't know much about them. But of more interest is this figure up here, this mask or this face or this Katsina type face-like figure. And you'll see, again, here's another pot, another Tabira black on white pot. And you got that kind of mask, like you got the bottom of the faces painted with and so on. So you got a very similar kind of an idea. And then down here, you got a man standing next to a woman with her legs spread in very much the same fashion. Appears to be another captured woman in the scene. And while this one does not have a war scene in it, it certainly suggests this captured woman idea that's going on with the figure made. And here's the date for the AD 1280 to 1430. That's a date on this mask up here. And here's the date for this figure down here, which is 1290 to 1620. You can see the date for the Tabirware pottery down here at 1550 to 1672. This date matches that better. This one up here, I would suggest this is charcoal. This is probably an old wood issue where the charcoal used to make the painting was picked up off the floor of the rock shelter, and it was already been burned at some period of time earlier. So this is one, it'd be nice to get a second date on, but it's still close enough in the way of comparison that it becomes pretty darn interesting. So here we are, we've got 3 of these captured women scenes. And there are these things. These are exceptionally rare. You probably have heard from Jim Kaiser and Dave Kaiser and other people out there about biographic rock art on the Northern Plains. You just don't find these things. There's one example on the Northern Plains, and here we've been looking down here in this area now, and we found 3 of them. And after we found this one, we find 2 more examples of this. And so how many more are there? And how much more is this a difference between the 2 kinds of rock art, between the Northern Plains and the Southern Plains? Notice that both of these guys who are next to these captured women at Abo West and 2 little guys have got a stick or something in their hand. I have no idea what that is. It could be acoustic. It could be that they're counting coup on these women, although that's not something that is said to have been done. But it is of considerable interest. And certainly these sites just desperately need more attention. They need more recording effort for people to get out to them. Here's that black mass site on the opposite side. And all there is at this site, there are several panels, but the only panel of interest to us is this one called the Black Mask. But you have to be really careful with that word mask, because if that were war paint, that's just simply paint being put on a warrior's face. And so these might not be Katsina faces at all. And we've been mistakenly associating them with that terminology, and we probably shouldn't be. This one's got, look at the feathery head on the top and the feathers over the top of the head of this one. And I think quite comparable designs and of some interest. So let's jump now to Tahoe Arroyo, which is on the opposite side of the mountains and south of Socorro, New Mexico. And here's Tahoe Arroyo, and it's Tahoe, as the word means cut in Spanish, so it's a cut in the canyon wall here for cut or arroyo on the side here. And so you'll see here's Arroyo del Tahoe pictograph site, and this is a site open to the public, and several people have been there with me. And one of the more interesting things about the site is when you find the site, you think, how on earth could there be any rock art at that site? Look at that wall. I mean, it's got, like just looks more like a gravel pit than it does a rock art site. But interestingly enough, they plastered the surface. They put plaster or mud over the surface in much the same way you would on a kiva wall. And when you paint inside the kiva, you put plaster over the last example in the kiva, and then you repaint over the top of it with a fresh set. And this, they lay the plaster down and put this painting of this mask over the top of it. But interestingly enough, there are other figures at the site in paint. And here's a shield-bearing warrior. Here's a row of marching warriors, probably, and there's a shield figure up above them, up here. I suggest that this is probably a war captain, or the Puebloan peoples had war captains. And I would suggest that these are either individuals who are going out to war, or they could be in training for war. The Pueblos did not have standing armies, and they did not have boot camps, but they did have, for a group of people who became the warriors who were called upon, warrior societies did have training with a lot of running and a lot of exercise. So their running was used in a lot of different ways in warfare, not only communicating with messages and so on and so forth. But so in other words, you've got this war captain and these groups of people moving along in a row across the bottom. I mean, a really fascinating scene. And again, the paint's falling off the wall. We've been back to this now several times, and every time we go, there's more paint has fallen off the wall. And we're not allowed to date at this site. We again, you so desperately need to pick up some of this paint that's fallen on the ground below the thing and radiocarbon date it, which we probably could. You can see the detail. I mean, incredible detail, like stripes on the pants, different colors, like they're wearing leggings or some sort of moccasin type with a legging over the top, a detail that could be brought out if you were to do more recording at the site. Let's jump now to one called Cerro Indio, and you'll see that this site is above Tahoe Arroyo and below Abo, and it is in fact the top of a big high ridge here like this. And you'll see here's the ridge. This is an aerial photo from the Socorro County Historical Society. Here's the ridge that the site is on. There is an old road, was used mostly for getting grazing up on top of it up here. And Mark Willis used a drone to fly on top of it. And here's the Pueblo that you can see in the drone here, Kivas, that you see, and you see the outline of the buildings and the structures that had a wall around the top of it. Of course, this was all defensive. When you look at the wall around the outside, it's covered with petroglyphs all the way around the outside of the thing. What's of interest to us are these painted images. And this is on private land. This site's on a private ranch, and the woman who owns it allows people to go if they come and ask appropriately to visit the site. It's quite an incredible place to go too. You'll see here's the D stretch of it. You'll see these individuals have got these high, I don't know what they are, these big high shaft like things that they're holding. I just don't know what they are. One looks to have a shield. Here's the shield guy over here. He looks to be engaged in a fight with this guy down here. This side again, here's another shield guy with a bow fighting a guy who appears to be hiding behind a shield on this side, another shield type figure. And again, this is a site that people go and take a few photographs, but it's not been systematically recorded. And these kinds, like this whole little area where these scenes are, would probably produce some more information about fighting and warfare and how it fits into the general scheme of the stuff in this region. Something of considerable interest is this one image that appears to be using a bugle. So it's probably a conch shell bugle. And there are examples of these in Pueblo societies, and they'd put a stem into them and then blow, so that this was probably a point on the top of this ridge where this thing is, that an individual would call to arms the people who were to come and fight. So that war captain would have a person out there who was a sentry, who would serve if this village were being attacked from below. He'd call all the people out, and the warrior society would come to fight off the people who were attacking. This is another example of an image that we would not find in Northern Plains warfare biographic rock art at all. Something completely different that you find on the Southern Plains in this area. Here's another example of it at another site, which is about 50 miles south of the site I was just talking about. So, but you can see you've got essentially the same thing. This is a petroglyph at this site. Well, let's move to Abo. How am I doing on time here? I guess I'm moving along to the finish. So at Abo here, this is a big major site right next to the highway. And it has painted images on the ceiling of the cave. And you'll see here I am at the site with Ann Briarty, who was one of the past presidents of the American Rock Art Research Association. She's Laguna Pueblo. Here I am with Harold Daniels, also at the site, talking about the rock art at the site. It's really important to get American Indians out to sites with us, because they do bring a lot of information to the sites about various aspects of what's going on, lots of times more about what's around the site and what's surrounding the site than the actual rock art itself. The interesting thing about this site is that Mary Coulter, who was the architect for the Fred Harvey Company, and you may know the Watchtower in the Grand Canyon. If you don't, it's an extremely interesting place to visit. And the Watchtower has on the ceiling, it has a series of paintings on the ceiling that Herbert Schweitzer from Mesa Verde worked at Mesa Verde. He actually did a lot of drawings of the stuff at the Abo site that I was just showing, and Mary Coulter used those drawings on the ceiling of the rock shelter. And they were put up there by Fred Geary and Fred Capote. And so these artists from Oklahoma and the Hopi artists of quite a bit of fame. And here's Bob Mark, a person who a lot of people know from Rupestrian Cyber Services. He's in the process of photographing all this. Here's published in Plateau in 2006. The ceiling of the Watchtower is covered with all these various paintings. And all of these came from, here's Mary Coulter's diary. All of these came from the Abo cave wall painting. And she points out here that these original paintings were now being destroyed, and that fortunately that they were sketched, and so that Herman Schweitzer sketched them, and so that now we have them. And in fact, they'd be gone if we went back today. So let's go back today. Here's him, and here's the sketch, and here's what's left. She's right. I mean, it's essentially gone. It's left on the wall. So we are lucky to have these. and they're on the ceiling of the watchtower. That's just a little aside, which is kind of interesting stuff about what happened in the 1920s, 1930s. So here, about a decade ago, or maybe less now, Facebook was putting in a fiber optic line, and the site I'm talking about, Abo site, is right here. And there was a large rock right here, a big, huge rock. And instead of trying to drill through the rock and stay within the right of way, they cut back into the bank toward this rock shelter. And the archaeologist at Abo at Salinas Missions was going to work, and he looked out the window and saw this, and he blew the whistle on him. And so they started all kinds of new looking at the entire thing. They came to see if any rocks were falling out, and et cetera. And in the process, they found this panel, which you'll see a lot of people have seen it before, up on the ceiling of the little rock shelter here. You'll see a horned snake, and you'll see some dragonflies, and you'll see one of these Katsina faces, probably more likely a Katsina face than the ones I was showing you with the black lines on their face, and some other triangular designs. But nobody had noticed, because it was down here behind the weeds. Nobody had noticed in this area down here, there was another painting down here. And when we find that painting down below, as you'll see here, it ends up being this painting of a war scene, a battle that's going on between these individuals in the back here who are apparently attacking. We don't know if this guy is in the process of running away because he's got arrows through him, and these are the people shooting these arrows. This might be the war captain over on this side. And so that we would have the war captain, and you'd have arrows flying in all directions around here. Yeah, this could be a lion. That mountain lions are big with warfare in Pueblo society. Could be a captured bow. If it were a recurve bow, then it'd probably suggest it was an Apache bow that got captured. This probably would represent an Apache who's running away. We don't know how this guy fits into the scene, but it looks like this might be a pre-horse scene, which is certainly of considerable interest when we're looking at these scenes of warfare back and forth between these peoples who were the Salinas mission people and the Apache, or the people coming in from the plains. So why does this happen? Well, there is a major break in the mountains here, so that you got a major break in the mountains, so you got to pass through here. This white space right here is all salt deposits. So that's why it's called Salinas Pueblo Missions, all salt deposits. So for centuries, Puebloan peoples from this side were coming over to this side to get to this salt on this side, which set up ample opportunity for warfare, a place where they could be caught by the Apache and back and forth. So that's about it. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you so much. Just gonna get all my tech together and see if there are any questions on Zoom. We'll see if we can do a little quick Q&A going on here. Okay. Any questions here from OMSI folks? All right, we got one over here. Here. See if I can juggle two mics here. And let me show you a bit of the crowd here you got going.
I got two questions on dating of that pottery. I think you mentioned something about plasma arc. How do you explain how that works? And two, where did they get that conch shell? Where did they, is that from the Baja California or Southern California coastline, or where that came from? Do you have any idea?
I think the shell came from Baja. I think you're correct. And there is an article written on that on the shells and more about where they came from. There are several of those that are known in collections. So it's not the only one. And they break off a part of it in a certain way so they know they were used as horns. And if you want to email me, I could find the article if you have a considerable interest about it. And the dating technique is actually pretty well known now. It's called plasma oxidation dating. And it requires a small sample of the paint, and not very, actually quite small. And when Karen Steelman, who does this for the lab in Shumla, she runs a dating facility down there. She learned the process from Marvin Rowe, and he also has a dating facility in Santa Fe to use this process. And they take a small sample of the paint and they process it in a low temperature plasma. So they heat that sample and they get the organic matter in the paint to release into a gas, and then they siphon that gas off and radiocarbonate it. And what they do to make sure that it didn't come from the rock, because they've always got a little bit of rock in the sample. When they scrape the sample off, they use a scalpel and scrape the little bits of paint pigment off to take for their dating process. And to make sure the date didn't come from something organic in the rock, they take a sample of the rock next to where the paint came from and they put it through the same process. And if they don't get any organics, then they reason that it came out of the paint, and it was be the binder that was used to hold the paint together. Unless it were charcoal paint, then it would work. But usually most paint is made out of inorganic materials like ochres, and you can't date them directly. You have to have something mixed with it, like some sort of animal fats or something, and that's what they're getting to release the carbon in to be able to date it. There's quite a bit about it in several places. The easiest place to learn more about it is the Shumla website. So I'm not remembering the exact name of Shumla, but SHUMLA. You put Shumla rock art into Google and you'll find quite a bit about it, and you'll be able to find more about the dating.
Thank you. And we have a question here.
So in the fish images, could any of the fish be identified with current living existing species of native fish?
Yeah, interestingly enough, there was some people wrote an article about that those fish that were on the rocks in the area in and around Las Cruces, New Mexico, and on Mimbres pots suggested that the people had contacts to the coast of Baja or somewhere south of California, and that were Pacific type fish. But when we looked at the fish themselves and we looked at the fish that were available, we actually wrote an article called Pup, Suckers, and Cats, which was pup fish and suckers and catfish, and all of the fish were locally available in the Rio Grande River. And you can find those same fish on the rocks. It had nothing to do with having come from some long distance away. They're just putting local fish on the pots and the rocks.
All right. And we have a question from Zoom. Can you recommend any good museums or accessible rock art sites to visit in that area?
Yeah, Three Rivers. Three Rivers is open to the public. It's a Bureau of Land Management site. Waco Tanks is also open. You have to get a permit there to go in, but it's a daily trek that they take you through the site. Alamo Mountain's hard to find, but it's on BLM land, and anyone who can find their way out there can spend a day wandering around seeing more rock art. It'll make them sick. They'll see so much rock art. So
we got a question back here.
Yeah, with the number of scenes that you have dealing with warfare and warriors, are you seeing any signs of intentional obliteration of the rock art, say from a neighboring group that's intentionally obliterating rock art of a neighboring group?
we haven't seen that in this area, but that's actually pretty well known in Mexico, with a couple of sites in Mexico where Solveig Turpin wrote about how one group of warriors would come and then another group and come and wipe out what the last one did and wipe out the other one, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't seen that in this area, although that one image of that captured woman's got lines, incised lines across the bottom of the figure. So I don't know what that all that means, but I don't think they're trying to obliterate it.
All right. And I don't see any more questions. Oh, okay. Got a question up front here. And we'll probably take one more after this.
You used the word Katsina. The
Yes.
only time I've heard that word is in connection with Katsina dolls. How
Yes.
They differ.
Well, Katsina dolls are often called Katsina, or Katsina is the more appropriate term. And Katsina dolls are replicas of various Katsinas, or the dancers that were existed and worked around pueblos.
All right. Any more questions out here from the crowd? You have one?
The pottery, was that developed in the area, that New Mexico area, or did they get that idea for making pottery from deeper into Mexico, down south, further south in Mexico? Is that, or is that
I think it all came locally.
locally? Okay.
Yeah, I think all of it came locally, and the Tabira ware did develop out of Chupadero black on white. I didn't take you through a whole deal with you know, the whole business with various potteries and so on, but Tabira ware, the one that I showed you that I'm the most interested in finding the comparisons to, did develop out of Chupadero black on white. And Chupadero is just a local name.
All right. I think that's it from the crowd. Thank you so much for this. This was amazing. I think we all loved your talk. Got a really good turnout too. It was wonderful to hear you and see some of the sites.
All right, good.
Thank you so much. And thank you for bearing with the audio problems we had today as well, everybody. And yeah.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.